Today's gospel reading is from the book of Mark, verses 21 through 29. You can follow along in your pew hymnals if you like on page 916. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and for the leaders of Galilee. When his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests, and the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it." And he solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" She replied, "The head of John the Baptizer." Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oath and his guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then she gave it to her mother. When the disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Your father is sorry. He had to work.
He said he was gonna be here, he promised.
I know, but he promises that he's gonna see you tomorrow. Okay? He's gonna pick you up from school. All right? So come on. Make a wish.
I wish that for only one day Dad couldn't tell a lie.
What's your problem, schmuck? I'm an inconsiderate brat!
You know why I pulled you over?
Depends on how long you were following me.
Why don't we just take it from the top?
Here goes. I sped. I followed too closely. I ran a stop sign. I almost hit a Chevy. I sped some more. I failed to yield at a crosswalk. I changed lanes in the intersection. I changed lanes without signaling while running a red light and speeding.
Is that all?
No. I have unpaid parking tickets. Be gentle. It was me!
Hi, Mr. Reed! Like the new dress?
Whatever it takes to focus off your head. What's up, Fletcher?
Your cholesterol! Fatty!
Get me, Logan!
Hey, Fletcher! Hey, you're not important enough to remember!
What's it gonna be, Mr. Reed?
A pockmark eventually! Don't ask! For God's sakes, don't ask! All right, you can beat this. It's all a matter of willpower. A test. Something small. Red. All right? Now focus. The color of this pen is the color of this pen is the color of the pen that I hold in my hand is royal blue.
So this next slide, who knows who this character is on this next slide? House, one of my favorite TV characters of absolutely all time. I love Dr. House. I know as a pastor I probably shouldn't like a character like that, but I love Dr. House. There are two kinds of people, I think it could be argued, two kinds of people, two categories of people that we don't like. that we don't like to be around. We don't like their behavior. We don't like these two categories of people. And the first category of people that we don't like are liars, right? We don't like liars. We don't like lies. We don't like the concept of lies. We don't like the ideas of lies. We don't like the consequences of lies. And we don't like liars. I don't know about you, but that's true for me. I mean, even to the point where in our tradition, right, we are Christians, we have these 10 commandments, and we've devoted an entire commandment to thou shalt not. Right. Except for there's one problem that Dr. House teaches us. There it is. Next slide. Everybody lies. Absolutely right. I challenge you to, and if you want, you can, this would be great to have a Twitter feed right now, because I challenge you to Google statistics or research on lying, and you will find just tons of information, a plethora of information. Every major university has these studies on lying and how many people lie. And I started looking. I want to share some of it with you. Next slide. Every child, or the average child, I should say, begins to lie between the ages of 2 and 3 years old. By the age of 4, 90% of children have learned the concept of lying. By adulthood, 60% of adults can't have a conversation without lying at least once. So that would be all of you. Right? The second part of that is and in a 10-minute conversation, an average of 3 lies are told when meeting someone new. So if you're a visitor today, I'm going to be fact-checking you all morning long, all right? Other statistics: who gets lied to the most? Parents at 86%, friends at 75%, siblings at 73%, and spouses at 69%. We lie to those who are closest to us the most. Next slide, please. Most people lie an average of 4 times a day, which gives you 1,460 times a year that you break one of the 10 commandments. A man can lie twice as much as a woman in a single day. Ladies, no comment. Carl Jung, the psychologist, said there are 2 types of people that he could not cure: schizophrenics and compulsive liars, because they both create alternate realities. We all lie. That's one of the categories that I created this morning, that I do think that categories of people that we don't like. But there's another category that I started to talk about. And you would think that this other category of people that we don't like probably also has a commandment that they break, or something like that they do. But instead of having a quality or a characteristic that's like lying, they actually have a characteristic that's opposite of lying. I don't think that we like people who tell the truth either. The complete truth, the honest truth, the bold truth, the harsh truth. Why? Because it's offensive. Right? In this movie, Liar, Liar, many of you have probably seen it, but if you haven't seen it, what's going on, and you saw it pretty much in that clip, is that you have a boy. His dad and his mom are divorced, and Jim Carrey plays the father, and he never makes it to his kid's stuff, right? And he's always coming up with excuses. He's lying. He's doing that kind of stuff to give excuses, and so he makes that wish. Please, Daddy, for one, or please, I wish that my daddy can tell the truth for at least one day, or not lie for at least one day. And that's where the humor begins, right? It pokes fun because Jim Carrey has to tell the truth and says some pretty mean and offensive things. Because when we tell the truth, we do end up offending people. And we quickly realize that this is probably why we learn at a very young age to lie, right? We learn because if we tell the whole truth, we probably are going to be hurting someone's feelings on some level. So we shade it, we color it, we twist it, we spin the truth just enough so we can kind of fit into society, so we keep some sort of social order, so we can be polite. A friend of mine tells a story that I'm sure many of you have a similar story to. If we sat around, we could tell these stories. But he tells a story about when he was 4 years old. His mom and dad probably told him this story. He probably doesn't remember. But when he was 4, there was a conversation happening between his mom and his mom's sister, his aunt. And the aunt was asking his mom, hey, how come the kids don't come over and visit my house more often? You could drop them off, they could visit the house, we could watch them, and you could go and have a day together or something like that. And before the mom could answer, the 4-year-old steps in and says, my mom says it's because your house is too dirty. right? It's not always good to tell the flat-out, harsh truth because it offends people. Next slide, please. We are in the Gospel of Mark. We are, as some of you know, in this summer, we are following the lectionary, so we're taking those kind of in-order stories right now in the book of Mark. We'll return to sermon series a little bit in the fall again, but right now we're in the Gospel of Mark, and we've been handed a text this morning that I don't really want to preach on, right? My job as a pastor is to proclaim the good news, and now I'm given a beheading story to do it. Anyone want my job today? Anybody? Right? That's the story that we have. That's the reality. That's what we are faced with. But I'm not going to talk about the beheading. I'm not going to talk about the woman, the dancer, who, when asked or told that she could have anything she wants, she asks for John's head on a platter. That either is not what I want to talk about. What I do want to talk about, what I want to focus on, is the thing about John the Baptist that made people want his head on a platter in the first place. What did he do? Who was he? Why would anyone say that of him? The reality is that John the Baptist is a prophet. He prophesies. He tells the truth. He does those kinds of things. I almost gave it away. What do prophets do? Prophets prophesy. They do what? They tell the future? Things like that. Everyone agree with that? Telling the future? There are certainly two different ways of looking at a prophet. There are prophecies that we look for coming true or not coming true. Those would be future-seeing kind of prophets. But biblically, a lot of prophets aren't future seers. They are truth tellers. Prophets don't just or necessarily see the future. They tell the truth. They call it as they see it. And when they speak the truth, they offend people. Because the truth is actually very, very offensive, and that's exactly what John does. He speaks the truth. He speaks the gospel truth about Herod's life, about Herod's wife, who is his living brother's wife. He calls it out. He speaks the gospel truth. And it's not just Herod that's offended. It's all the people around Herod who benefit from that particular way of life that are offended. When John speaks the gospel truth, people are absolutely offended. So my question for us today is this: who are you offending? Where are you speaking the gospel truth in such a way that someone takes offense to it? Who wants your head on a platter this week? Another way of looking at this isn't just what are you saying, or what's the gospel truth that you are speaking, but it's almost the attitude that it seems that prophets like John the Baptist seem to have. An attitude that he seems to have is something called sanctified indifference. Sanctified indifference. It isn't that prophets like John the Baptist, Jeremiah, Nehemiah, Zephaniah, Peter, Paul, Jesus, you or I, it's not like they want to die. It's not like they want their head on a platter. But the reality is that attitude of sanctified indifference says it's not that they don't care about their life, but they do care more about God's will in this world than they do about their own comfort. Sanctified indifference, in my opinion, might be something that we have forgotten a little bit as a Christian community. And maybe, to be fair, maybe it's something we haven't really been taught or taught ourselves. This idea of sanctified indifference, this idea of speaking the gospel truth regardless of the consequences. The reality is that for John the Baptist, the guy who got beheaded in the story, sanctified indifference was a hallmark of his. And it's that sanctified indifference that came from an unyielding, unwavering, undiluted devotion to the world God told him to create and be a part of and to build and to participate in. And so I ask you again, in light of that, in light of the world that we as Christians are supposed to build and participate in, God's work, our hands, who are we offending? Who is offended by the gospel truth that we are supposed to proclaim? I mean, we think sometimes, I'll admit I do, right? Christian nice, right? They'll know they are Christians by our love, making the world a happy place. Even Jesus speaks to this kind of offense. He says this, next slide, he says this in the book of Luke: beware when all speak well of you. Who doesn't speak well of you? And why? Have we spoken the gospel truth enough so people don't speak well of us? I'm not talking about pushing our faith down the throat of others. I'm not talking about standing on corner and annoying people with that kind of evangelism. I am, however, talking about the kind of gospel truth that calls out injustice, calls out poverty, calls out homelessness, and all the systems of the world that keep people from being the human that God created them to be, that keep people in a place of being less than human. Who's offended when we call that out? The reality is that truth tellers, gospel truth tellers, do not have good labels in our culture, do they? The sanctified indifference ignores the labels of whistleblower, tattletale, goody two-shoes. Sometimes this kind of offense, however, doesn't even come in the form of words. This next slide I found online. Truth without grace is legalism. And think about that. The truth without grace is legalism. Grace without truth is romanticism, and grace and truth together is dynamism. I really liked it, and then I had to look up dynamism. And it says this, or the definition is this: the quality of being characterized by vigorous activity. Does your gospel truth show dynamism? Does your gospel truth that we are called as people of God to live out show some sort of vigorous activity in this world? This next week, I said I'm wearing this t-shirt for a reason, and you see t-shirts, blue and orange, sprinkled around. This next week, about 30,000 people, youth mostly, are going to descend on the city of Detroit. And literally descend on the city of Detroit. And they're going to have a great time. They're going to be with friends. They're going to have great worship. They're going to see things. They're going to learn about the city. But the reason that they're here, one of the biggest projects that they have, is to serve in our communities. Serve in our communities and get to know and help in all kinds of loving ways people who are so hungry that they may not know where their next meal is coming from. They're going to confront poverty in the neighborhoods that they go into, and they're going to see and maybe even ask questions about the systems of injustice that have kept it that way. And if we only look at this week where 30,000 people come here as just a good thing, how cool that they're coming here, and miss the reality that somebody should be offended by the fact that 30,000 people had to come here in the first place. That there's so much work, injustice, poverty, and hunger that it takes 30,000 people to come here and do something about it. There should not be that much work to do. And we should be a little bit offended by that. I mean, we know there are all kinds of realities behind that, but when it comes to living the gospel truth, it should always call into question the systems of oppression and the systems that allow injustice and the systems that keep people hungry. I don't think that this idea of sanctified indifference, this attitude of that, and the idea of calling out, of speaking and living the gospel truth is not supposed to offend people for offense sake. Like I said, it's not about just ramming your faith down someone's throat or pointing out people's wrongdoings. I think that the kind of offense we're talking about is about the systems of the world that keep people from being who they are created to be. I think we need to relearn, or maybe learn for the first time, this art of sanctified indifference. John the Baptist isn't a story about a beheading. It's not a story about betrayal of a dancer who, because of her mom, asked for someone's head on their plate. It's a story about a prophet who spoke and lived the offensive reality of gospel truth for the sake of Jesus Christ. I offer to us today that as Christians, as disciples, as followers of Christ, that we too are called to be prophets, called to live out gospel truth. If we do that, I have to ask the question, who are we offending? Who are we offending this week, next month, next year? Who are you offending this afternoon by living out the gospel truth? Let us pray. Creator God, we thank you for being a God of grace, of mercy, of love, justice, for being a God that calls us into action and asks us to participate in ushering in heaven on earth here in your creation. However, this day I ask that you give us courage, insight and courage, insight to know what that gospel truth is from your actions and your stories, from your word, that we can know what it is to live and speak gospel truth into this world, but also courage. Courage to actually do it once we spot it. Courage to actually call it out. Courage to actually act with vigorous activity in the name of that gospel truth. We thank you again for we thank you for the forgiveness that you give us and for the call that you lift us up into. And we ask only for strength to carry it out. In your name we pray. Amen.